Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Julie Mashek, Director of Global Programs in 92nd Street Y's Belfer Center for Innovation and Social Impact. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight's conversation is part of a new initiative from the 92nd Street Y called Campaign for 100%. Between now and Election Day, we're hosting a series of virtual conversations that explore the impact of more people voting on individual lives, communities, government, and society as a whole. Please go to 92y.org/campaign for 100% to learn more. 92nd Street Y would like to thank the Jack Brooks Foundation for their support of Campaign for 100%. Their collaboration made tonight's event possible. Please join me now in welcoming Jeb Brooks, founder of the Jack Brooks Foundation.
Hello, and welcome to the 92nd Street Y's Campaign for 100% program. I'm Jeb Brooks, chairman of the Jack Brooks Foundation. Tonight's important discussion is making an impact, voting, good public policy, and overcoming partisanship. Our foundation's mission is simple: engage to inspire and inspire to vote. We want every individual to reconnect with our representative democracy through participation in the entire voting process. Tonight we will discuss the legend and the legacy of Chairman Jack Brooks, who served this country in Congress for 42 years. Congressman Brooks devoted his life to crafting quality, effective public policy, and is an exceptional example of a representative working for all of America, regardless of political affiliation. The high standards exemplified by Chairman Brooks must not be relegated to the history books. Those standards are even more important today, and current politicians would do well to follow his example. Jack Brooks knew constructive change doesn't just happen because you think something isn't right. It's tough, tedious work. We at the JBF will continue this tough, tedious work through initiatives like our Help America Vote Challenge. This challenge will encourage local groups working within their community not only to improve voter turnout, but also to promote participation in every election. We hope you will stay connected with us at jackbrooksfoundation.org. JBF initiatives will inspire individual participation in our nation. There are many different views among Americans, whomever you are, and whatever change you would like to see in this country. Casting your vote will help to make that change. And now, we hope you enjoy tonight's presentation.
Hi, good evening, and welcome to the first part of a two-part program. I'm here with two experienced journalists. We're going to talk about Jack Brooks. First, we have Hendrik Hertzberg. He's an American liberal journalist. He's best known as a longtime political commentator for the New Yorker magazine. I could go on, but long resumes here, so I'm going to provide the top lines. And of course, Timothy McNulty, he's one of the co-authors of the book on Jack Brooks, and he was the national foreign White House correspondent for the Chicago Tribune, and he taught at the University of Chicago and my alma mater, Medill School of Journalism. So I want to get right into the book. Tim, there's a lot of anecdotes in there that are impressive. One that was particularly impressive to me is there's a point where Bob Dole, senior Republican, is negotiating with Democratic leaders in the House, and he asks the Democratic leaders for a signed guarantee of whatever they're promising, and they say, the leaders say, do you want also a signed guarantee from Jack Brooks? And he's like, no, his word is good. This doesn't happen today in today's Congress, and the Congress that I cover, it's just not common. Do we need to get back to this? And is there a path to get back to this sort of politics?
Well, I think there was a sense too that compromise was what made things work. That's legislation. If it was a zero-sum game, whoever was on top at the moment would be the only winner, and they just left resentment on the other side. they understood, Brooks and others of his generation understood that it was important to get people to give something or give up something. And so that is what made it work. Bob Dole, that anecdote is something that does illustrate not only the way it worked by personal relationships, but also the sense of integrity that people came to expect and cherish. And so I think if you're not dealing with someone who has integrity, then you never know what promise will be kept, what will be broken. So I think that's the lesson from that anecdote.
And it's impressive that it's sort of not only across the aisle, it's across the Capitol. It's between chambers of Congress. Back to the first question is it possible to get back to that?
Rick?
Well, it'll be a hell of a task to get back to that. The ecology of Congress is so different now from what it was in Jack Brooks' day, where when actually at that time, each party was also a coalition. Each party was a coalition of some liberal Republicans and conservative Republicans, conservative Democrats and liberal Democrats. So the idea of compromise and horse trading was kind of built into the way it was structured. Now things are so polarized. That's one of the differences. Another difference is that there are no or few recognized journalistic authorities. There's Fox News and there's MSNBC and there's CNN floating around, more on the MSNBC end of things than the Fox News end of things. But these conditions make it a hell of a lot more difficult to do the kind of work that Jack Brooks did.
Now, before we paint a picture, like a rosy picture of the good old days, I mean, one of the things Jack Brooks did, he drafted the articles of impeachment against President Nixon. I think people forget, but we had an impeachment this year before everything else happened this year. And there were scandals. There was Iran Contra. There was the 80s were not a particularly easy time politically, although now they look like a cakewalk. But what are the lessons that we learned from Jack Brooks? And I know there are many on sort of the limits of presidential power and how much Congress can put a stop to a president if congressional leaders decide that the president's going too far.
Well, I think that as we can see, like daily, the presidents will take and go up to the limit of their personal integrity, and it's up to Congress to say that's enough or stop there. And I think it's something that individual congressmen have to deal with and on their own conscience. I think it's, like I say, the daily experience of reading the newspaper shows that doesn't happen very often. You don't get people bucking their party or their allegiance to the president.
So have things changed so much that current members of Congress don't have anything to learn from, the biggest names of the past century? Or is there still something, is there still a line that connects the way Congress worked when Jack Brooks wanted to be chairman, and that was his ultimate goal, was to be chairman? Now members, it seems sometimes, or they're criticized, they all want to be president.
Well, he wanted to be chairman of the judiciary, as you say, and he wanted to serve his district. So he was interested in power. It was not that he wasn't a partisan. He was extremely partisan, but he also recognized that if he was going to be accomplished, then he would need people from both sides. He would have to establish personal relationships. It was an era when people, politicians, and their families lived in the area. It wasn't, they didn't have boys' apartments where 6 congressmen shared a big apartment. They had homes where their spouses and children lived and went to school together, and they also had parties and lunches and dinners together. So it was a very personal time. It wasn't just posturing. And I think maybe what part of it is to get away from some of the posturing. I think when Newt Gingrich came in and started using C-SPAN to posture and talk to an empty chamber as if he was lecturing, everyone air. I mean, if that's the definition of posturing.
Right. There's another thing you said, Tim, that I want to ask Rick about. You said the limits of personal integrity, and you said presidents will go to the limits of their personal integrity. It's been alleged often that the current president, let's say that limit is more extensive in him than it has been in previous presidents. Many Republicans would allege that those limits were stretched in the 90s, but it is continuously alleged. But it is true that this president breaks norms at a speed that reporters can't keep up with. So, Rick, I mean, being that he has been so far politically successful doing that, is that still a limit? Are we still stretched to the limits of our personal integrity?
Well, I do think that the Trump phenomenon is a singularity. I doubt we'll see it repeated anytime soon, but it has created an atmosphere that makes us think that things have fundamentally changed. That the model of this ramshackle kind of consensual form of government that we've grown used to over decades and centuries, for that matter, may not be irretrievably broken. This may be simply a phenomenon of the accident of Donald Trump. Now, the accident of Donald Trump is made possible by flaws in the Constitution, this 2-century-plus mechanism, which, against all common sense and democratic notions, installed a loser in the vote of the people in the White House, and one who has absolutely no knowledge of, let alone respect for, the norms, the informal norms that had made this 18th century invention work in a cranky way, a noisy way, a messy way, but still work. It is not working right now.
Rick, we talked earlier, and you mentioned 2 things that could change and that were within the power of Congress to change. One is campaign finance, and that certainly is, and also gerrymandering, where 95% or more of districts are almost solidly either red or blue, and that it doesn't matter who votes in the general election. It matters the primary elections, because if it's a red district, that's the way it's going to stay.
To be provocative, would a third element be the return of pork barrel politics?
You mean as a curative?
Yeah, as a curative, bringing back the. Jack Brooks, apparently he was criticized for helping his district, essentially, which and at the time, I believe in the mid 20th century, it was understood as helping your district, taking business to your district. But then it went away with Newt Gingrich, as you said. Is that a curative?
I think the curatives the curatives that I'm interested in go a lot deeper than that, because I think that all 3 branches of the government are hobbled, are problematic now. Not just the presidency not just the presidency, but Congress too. The very concept of single-member districts is a problem. I think I think, and I hope that people will start thinking more broadly in terms of larger kind of reforms, not getting rid of the Electoral College, but changing the Electoral College so that it reflects the national popular vote. That's a change that would be extraordinarily helpful and is within grasp. Maybe some experimentation with 3-member districts. I think one of the states, Ohio, I think, had that for a long time. That can break down this tribal kill or be killed mentality. And the Supreme Court, which we're now seeing some of the flaws there. There was an idea that the governor of Texas who ran for president, I forgot his name now, the Republican. Say what? Rick Perry, right? Rick Perry in his campaign suggested that the Supreme Court, that there should be 18-year terms for the Supreme Court, with one term, with a justice term expiring every 2 years. That would avoid this kind of freak show that we have now, where suddenly the Supreme Court is almost entirely appointed by one party. So there's a lot. I hope that one of the things that'll come out of the horrible situation we are now is going to be some of that kind of constructive thinking about how we can improve the Constitution so that the framers would praise us. I think if the framers came around now, they'd say, "You didn't fix that? What's the matter with you? We gave you the amendment process. Why didn't you fix it?"
Well, I think tinkering with the Constitution and the idea of whether that can happen is a perfect segue to begin the introductions of our next two panelists who will be joining us. We actually don't even need introductions, but we'll give them anyway. Two women from Texas who represent a lot of Texas liberalism, I would say, who are really the voices. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, of course. She's on her 11th term in the House of Representatives. She's from the 18th Congressional District around Houston. Some people call her the voice of reason. I found as a reporter covering this Congress and the few previous ones, definitely the voice of no nonsense. And she'll be joining us soon. And also Cecile Richards, of course, from long Texas political history. She's a national women's rights leader. And she's a co-founder of Supermajority, the new organization that's fighting for gender equality. I think Cecile is ready to join us. There you are.
Hey there.
Welcome.
Hi, Cecile.
Hey.
Hi there.
So we'll start out. I mean, we're talking about bipartisanship, about how to make bipartisanship work. And we're talking about tinkering with the Constitution. You absolutely, as far as I understand it, you need a bipartisan cooperation to actually make a constitutional change, because I can't imagine an election that would yield one party or the other enough power to change the Constitution by themselves. So, Cecile, what do you think is the missing element that could inspire parties to actually want to work together again?
Oh, wow. Well, I think Rick sort of expressed a little bit how incredibly hard that is. I guess my hope is really what I think is kind of the theme of this whole conversation, which is how do we restore democracy in a small d kind of way, voting rights, representation, things that actually would inspire the electorate and allow the electorate to be more engaged. Because I think what's not working is thinking it's going to come down from on high. I actually think the way change happens is from the bottom up. And anyway, I don't know if we'll get into this, but one of the things I know that Congressman Brooks was so kind of remarkable about him was supporting the Voting Rights Act, and how really radical that was in a way for a Southerner. And I feel like he would be looking at maybe like as Rick said, the founders were looking and say like, what, you're doing this again? I think he would look at us and say, you've actually, now essentially made taken all the teeth out of the Voting Rights Act. And we were seeing, of course, in this election, just rampant voter suppression, all kinds of tactics being used, particularly in my home state of Texas, to keep people from voting. So one of the things I think we have to do is actually get serious about democracy reform, in addition to whatever kind of constitutional changes that we make. And those are things that we know can get passed by Congress. And given the way the Republicans have rewritten the rules in the Senate, things that we could actually probably get done even in a new Congress where the Democrats are in control of the Senate.
And on that point, I mean, in Texas, you do have clearly two different political analyses battling each other. One where 100% of the people need to vote, or the more the merrier. You're never going to get 100% participation, or at least it's never been achieved.
Well, definitely not with the rules we've got. It's almost impossible. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Can you actually have a collaborative government with a party, with two parties, one that believes in franchising more voters and one that believes in putting more obstacles ahead of voters? Is that possible at this point?
Well, I have my opinion. I'd be eager to hear my co-panelists here, but no, it's really damn hard. But I was just looking at. It's interesting. I mean, I'd love to talk about Texas because it's such a state that is like a microcosm in many ways of everything I think that's happening in this country. But I was just looking at the numbers in Travis County, so that's Austin, Texas. 97% of people in Travis County are now registered to vote. And this is despite what is a very, very tough system to use to register voters. And we're seeing, I saw a post, of course, today because early voting began. I'm just like literally lines of people waiting for hours starting at 5 a.m. to go vote. And of course, we've seen really somewhat revolutionary change in terms of what happened in the 2018 elections. And I think what potentially happened this year. And that is just not because the powers that be wanted people to be engaged or wanted to have sort of a small d democratic representation, but because people just said, well, we're going to run for these districts anyway, even though they're gerrymandered, and folks started winning. And I think there is sort of an inescapable energy that happens when people believe that they have the power to make change. And perhaps the things that Governor Abbott is doing now to eliminate voting spots. I'm sure everyone's heard that, he made one early vote drop-off location in Harris County, which is the third largest county in the country. In some ways, I think perhaps it's just energized people who want to see actually real democracy in the state.
Before we go on with that, I'm curious, one thing that you mentioned, and Tim, I want to bring you in on this one. Jack Brooks, white Southern Democrat from mid-20th century America, decided to support civil rights legislation. It would seem crazy at the time. What drove him?
Well, I think he had an innate sense of fairness is the basis of it. He also had a very strong political mind, and he saw his district, which was on the eastern side of Texas and right on the Louisiana border. He had a very mixed constituency. Up in Orange and other towns nearby was the KKK, and then he had a lot of black constituents who were working in the oil fields, and so I think he understood that in order to make one constituent group, he had to kind of represent everyone. And he had enough political instincts to know how to do that. It wasn't just about, I think there's so much now fear and anger. He thought about it more like bringing people together on some common ground, whatever the common ground was. So I suspect that in Texas and in other places, like Georgia, I think also had lines of voters that were blocks and blocks long And so that sense of, wait, this is our country. And, that actually goes for both sides. It's not just on the liberal or democratic or progressive side. There are people who worry that, if they either are aligned with Trump or they're just aligned with their traditional Republican Party. But everyone, I think, and every American should be concerned.
So Rick, I want you to react to that a little bit. But one of the genius parts of the U.S. Constitution, I think, is that it sort of structures the perverse incentives natural to politics and makes them sort of act democratically. It makes people want to achieve a united goal, and people want to get people to vote. And it sort of it uses the worst of politicians to bring out the best of democracy, although it's clearly a slow and messy process, as we know.
I think we are seeing a sort of outpouring of irrational love for country in the lengths to which people right now are going to vote. People are going to the. I mean, here's my absentee ballot. I'm casting it, even though there's no question about how the vote's going to turn out in my district. I think people are. It's a beautiful thing to see people rising up to vote, and when they say they want to exercise the vote, they really mean this is for my country. This is for all of us. So even in this dark time, there is this flash of light. And I was very, very touched with what Cecile was saying. Things maybe not as bad as they look.
And Cecile, people are inspired for their own reasons, for what they've seen over the past 4 years, or maybe for what they've seen over the past 20 years. But what can organizations that want more people to vote, whose goal it is to get everyone participating, what are some of the important actions that have proven to really work and to enfranchise people, even given the obstacles in places like Texas?
Well, I mean, obviously that's a complicated question now, since because of the pandemic, it's eliminated a lot of the traditional ways in which, if we're a normal year, we wouldn't be sitting here. We would be outdoor knocking in Ohio or wherever. And so right now, I think it's much more, how do you actually use digital tools, as what we're doing, to make sure that people actually have information, know how to vote, because as we also see, the rules are changing day by day. I don't know if you followed the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, but where literally people had to wait in line in the middle of a pandemic, because the rulings kept going back and forth. And so part of it right now is just getting people basic information. But something I think that's even more inspiring and interesting about getting people to vote is who they get to vote for. And one thing I think has been underreported, and again, I'm going to use Texas since we're all talking about that state. It's such an interesting representation. In Texas, the diversity, and I was thinking of Congressman Brooks, but the diversity of the Texas Democratic delegation and if Congresswoman Lee arrives, she'll have a lot to say about this. But in 2018, we elected the first two Latinas ever to Congress from Texas, Sylvia Garcia and Veronica Escobar. This year, there are 10 competitive congressional races, despite the fact that we have such bad gerrymandering. These are races that people historically would just say, don't even bother running. In those 10 candidates, 8 of them are women and 6 of them are people of color. Okay, back in my mother's day, that just did not happen. That did not happen. And I feel like that's what's also happening in Texas and other places in the country, is people are saying, oh my God, I can go vote for someone who actually looks like me and may have a lived experience similar to mine. Well,
on your point, Congresswoman Jackson Lee is actually ready to join us now. She's coming in from a remote location, so let's welcome her.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Congresswoman. It's great to have you.
Thank you. I hope I'm for a little bit of humor, Cecile, I hope I'm sitting up straight. I think you can see where I am. I'm not really in the comfort of an office or a living room, but I'm rolling. but I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so very much.
So good to see you.
It's a complicated year. We're all logging in from wherever we can. But you joined us, Congresswoman, at the exact right time, because we are talking about participation and expansion of voters, of the voter rolls, essentially in Texas. So I guess the real question is, in 2018, you saw Democrats, and Cecile just mentioned this, have massive success. Women of color get elected, the first two Latinas. And in 2020, at a congressional level, the Democrats are attacking Texas hard in a way that we haven't seen in decades. Despite all of the obstacles to vote, despite of how difficult it is for people of color to register, to go to their only. So basically, why is this, Congresswoman? What is it that makes it that these obstacles are suddenly not impassable anymore?
Well, let me first of all say, out of respect for the Honorable Jack Brooks, I'm reminded of my first meeting with him in Washington with a great deal of excitement that I'd be able to come under a mighty oak tree, because that is the sense of his leadership in Congress when I came, and he could not be a truer Democrat. So I'm delighted to be here. And then, Cecile, I want you to know that your mother's race for Treasury Secretary, or the Treasurer of the state of Texas, was my first statewide race. And when you work for Ann Richards, you don't sit down. So I come to this meeting with the idea that we're now at a moment in history again where I'm finding that no Democrat wants to sit down. And I want you to know that there are obstacles, because there is no intent on Republicans to lose. There's no intent right now to indicate and collaborate, which when I came to Congress, we did that. And I love doing that. Even as a progressive, I love the opportunity to be able to work together with my colleagues. But I've been out today. Today was early vote. And I've been to sites with students. I've never seen the level of excitement from students of being able to change the direction, the tide of America by their vote. And as well, I've been in areas where you would typically say impoverished areas, where voters would say, what is it in it for me? Two ladies in particular that walked from a public housing community, I never say projects, their homes. And I said, please go back and tell others. They said, well, we are here. That's a good indication that people are seeing their change, their life, their new opportunities in this election. I think Joe and Jill, I think Kamala and Doug have claimed this for us. So the question is that people are more and more feeling that they've been left out, and they are buying into what we're saying. That means we have a great responsibility to really be change agents for them. They're buying into what we're saying. Use your vote and your power, and you're going to make a difference for yourself.
So what is it, going back to Texas a second, what is it about the state that produces so many politicians of high stature, but also just such presence? It's really, I think Texas has marked a huge difference in U.S. politics. And it seems that right now, as you're saying, Congressman, people are engaged in politics and people care. And that has to do a lot with the personality of the people running. But what is it about Texas?
I'd like to think of Texas as larger than life. And we grow up under that mindset that everything is big in Texas. Our voices are larger and louder. What we believe in are large and loud. What we are able to accomplish, because the state is so large, can be bigger than other states. And then as we've moved into the 21st century, it is important to note that we're becoming increasingly diverse, but we are building a genius in this state that is willing to take the roots of Jack Brooks and Ann Richards, and to take the likes of Barbara Jordan, Henry B. Gonzalez, Mickey Leland, and many others, and to wrap it up as our roots, our ancestry, and to be able to move Texas now more than ever into a column of respect and power. And that means that we are tired of being on the back seat in Democratic national politics. I saw it in the primary. We weren't expected to win, meaning Joe and Jill, in the Democratic primary. We had real competition for those of us who were advocating for this election. But Democrats got together, and all of a sudden that practical hat went on their head. And I'm a progressive and loved all of the candidates. And look what happened. We set our mind to a victory. So Texas is large, it's a large voice, but we have a soft heart. And I believe that with Texas on the national scene of Democratic leadership, national leadership, good things are going to happen for America. I think we see that we're coming into our moment of maturity with, as Cecile said, electing 2 Latina in 2018. We've never done that. I mean, that was just overwhelming. It was powerful. We started feeling good about that and almost had a United States senator.
Rick, tell me a little bit about, what happened from 1994 to 2018. Did Democrats give up on, and clearly not local Democrats, Congresswoman. I wouldn't say that there are very Democratic districts in the state, but this whole idea that since W won the governorship, Democrats haven't won statewide. Did they let go too easy before this new process that the Congresswoman is talking about?
Did who let go?
Did Democrats let go of Texas, or
Yeah.
tell me about this process?
Seemingly, I mean, I second everything that the Congresswoman just said. I mean, I'm a latecomer to loving Texas.
There's always room. We'll take anybody.
Yeah. But it's a country within a country, and I'd be happy to live there. I have to live in Austin, but I would be happy to live in Texas. What can I say except that if there's a resolution on the floor to pay tribute to and to love Texas, I vote yes.
Can I add something to what to kind of amen what Congresswoman Lee said, and because and I guess to your question about people that were larger than life. I mean, Texas does have this, and not just in politics, but in everything, sort of that think big, and like we're scrappy folks. People don't put on airs. That we're kind of plain spoken. I feel like there's a lot of things about Texas that are really endearing. I do think, though, one of the things that is important to recognize is that, Congressman Lee mentioned, Mickey Leland, some of the greats, Barbara Jordan and whatever, but that was really the exception, because generally the Texas Democratic Party did not support and encourage women, people of color to run for office. And that wasn't just in Texas, but I remember when Mom ran for governor, it wasn't because anyone said, it's your time. It was scrappy and hard. And so I do think one of the things that's interesting, we can talk about the demographic changes in Texas and really how the suburbs have just dramatically changed. Again, I think a microcosm of how this president doesn't understand this country when he talks about the suburbs. They are diverse, they are young, they are progressive. But also what we were seeing in Texas is not only the congressional level, but in Congresswoman Lee's county, Harris County, Houston is the most diverse city in the country. And in 2018, not only did we have historic congressional races, 17 African-American women were elected to judgeships. And a 27-year-old woman, Lena Hidalgo, won as county judge. These are things that never were supposed to happen. And again, I think it just really speaks to a whole new wave and kind of leadership in Texas. And obviously, Congresswoman Lee paved the way, and it is so exciting to see, I think, the seeds of all that, demonstrating what Congresswomen look like, and just bringing in a whole new generation of folks. I'm telling you, it's hard to really capture unless you're there on the ground, although the Congresswoman has done a good job of it. Something's happening there, and it's much bigger than the Democratic Party.
Just for our viewers' sake, county judge in Texas is a big deal. It's the executive of the county. So and Harris County is basically the fourth most populous city in the country. It holds Houston. And Tim, I want to bring you in. Comment on this. What do you think? And you're probably closest to talking to Jack Brooks himself. What do you think Jack Brooks would think if he saw this new multicolored, competitive Texas that's competitive in a different way than it was when he first got to Congress?
Well, he would certainly
answer. Can I step out for my other word, or and then I'll come back, or say a word and come back?
Oh, please go ahead as you wish, Congresswoman. We always want to hear from you.
And I will beg his pardon for him to be able to speak, but I'd like to be able to come back before you sign off on this wonderful audience. So I have the sign off time is when?
We will have audience participation in about 10 minutes from 6:55 to 7:15. So we'll be answering questions from the audience.
All right. So if I come back, if you'd be kind enough to allow me to say something, and then in the Q&A, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'll send questions your way.
I have some tall Texans that I'd like to talk about and what our heart is about here in Texas. Thank you so very much. I'm still on.
Thank you. So that's a good moment to remind everyone, if you have questions, you can start sending them in on the chat, and we will definitely address them. So Tim, what would Jack Brooks say?
Well, first of all, I think his district was multiracial, and he understood that you've got to bring people together. He also understood it that in Texas, there are some very wide differences between people like in Harris County and people where back in West Texas, where there are 100 or 250 people in the whole county. That you have to have a reconciliation between agricultural interests and the city interests. He and Dolph Briscoe, the former governor of Texas, were fast friends and even classmates at UT. And they were both in the Texas state legislature, and they would swap votes because each one needed the other. And so I think that recognition that you're saying Texas is a microcosm of the states, it is indeed. There is the Midwest, there is the coasts. Well, in Texas, you have all that in one humongous state. And by the way, I have 2 grandchildren in Houston, so I'm partial. But I think that Brooks would have looked at this and said, he was very pragmatic as well as political, and he was saying, if we're going to get something done, we're going to have people come out and vote, and we're going to have to change the systems, and it won't happen. As Cecilia, I think you said, from the top down. It will have to be as it is now. Here, apparently, going from the bottom up, from people willing to stand in line for hours and hours and hours in order to be heard.
Now, I want to get into, diversity is expressed obviously in many ways, racial and ethnic, of course, gender diversity. Cecile, you are the perfect person to ask about that in general in U.S. politics, and especially in Texas. I know that Supermajority released the What Women Want 2020, and that's a list of priorities for our leaders. Can you walk us a little bit through that list, and does it prioritize some needs over others, or is it just a series of needs that need to happen for gender equality to become a reality in American politics?
Well, I think it's interesting how women are very pragmatic. And in fact, actually what we see in general is that women in elective office, they're not, better, but there are certain things that they do. They actually do work across party lines more. They introduce more legislation, and they also actually support and focus on issues that often get left aside, which are sometimes considered women's issues, but are basically issues that affect everyone in the country on the economy and healthcare. Right now, given the pandemic, and I think the all what the pandemic has done is just really put a big spotlight on the issues that women have historically faced in trying to fit into an economy and really a political system that was never built for us to be in it. And so the issues that women care about, I don't think are surprising. There is enormous concern about racial inequity in this country, about the murder of Black people, and that crosses race, that crosses geography. There is enormous concern about what this pandemic is doing to women economically. I know many people are writing about this being the first women's recession, if you will, because women have been on the front lines of the pandemic, but will probably be, and particularly women of color, the last to recover. They're desperately concerned about healthcare, and I think you see that in every poll. That's probably the number one issue for everyone in this country, and they care about democracy and voting rights. And that's where I'm hoping, that there's energy coming out of this election, not only on issues, but on actually making systemic change in democracy. Looks like maybe we're on our own here.
Well,
apparently I have now had my own technical.
No. That's life in the time of COVID. So anyway, that's all to say. I just think women are the top line takeaway is women are enormously motivated to vote. They are enormously motivated to vote. They have been, many women, and I put myself in this category, have been waiting to vote since the day after the last presidential election. And they've spent the last 4 years organizing their little groups. They've been marching, they've been knitting hats, they've been going to congressional town halls. And right now they're the folks in large measure that are outside waiting in hours to early vote or to vote absentee.
So on this point of motivation, Rick, it seems that all the people that and any sort of voter suppression techniques were designed to stop are the people who are getting motivated. Is this democracy at work? Is this the way it's supposed to be?
Well, it's the way it's supposed to be in reaction to things that are not the way they're supposed to be. But I too have been amazed by this surge of voting, of people holding on to that idea of the vote, even when it's a little bit irrational. Even when they live in a one-sided district or a one-sided state or something like. People are the most important thing that's going to be expressed on election day is the love of the hope for democracy. That's what people are voting for. That's what people are excited about, whether they know it or not. That's the only explanation that really makes sense. And it's also a reaction to having a president who is firmly anti-small d democratic. And I think people want to express, but to vote against Trump is to vote for democracy.
Now, I guess open question for anybody who wants to take it. If this election does not provide confident results, when people are so motivated and people are taking actually more personal risk than ever to vote, if this election is not something people have confidence in afterwards, what's the risk there? What happens? Do people stop trusting?
Well, I mean, I would love to hear what you all say, but obviously we have a president who has already said this election is illegitimate. So he has already sent that message to his supporters that the election's not legitimate. So I don't think it's a question of if, there is obviously enormous anxiety among certainly the women we poll, enormous anxiety about what is going to happen next. And as I think we probably all agree, this is not going to be like Christmas where you get up the next morning and find out, what you got. It is going to be a long process. And that's not something we're used to in this country. And it's highly problematic. One thing I will mention too, that it's been so interesting to me talking to women who are not regular voters who aren't motivated, their understanding of how messed up the system is, their understanding that Hillary Clinton actually got 3 million more votes than the current president, and they're like being completely perplexed by why this is the system through which we elect presidents. It runs very, very deep, not just with people who, read everything in the paper. People understand that we have a system that does not work. And that's something I think that is problematic that we're going to have to address because it does suppress people's engagement.
I think if one thing we will try to maintain is the faith in the institutions, even though it seems now from a distance of 3 weeks that, we're not sure about that, how stalwart those institutions will be. But there still is a faith that, heck, this is America. This is the way we do things. And so if there's going to be disappointment, it'll be extraordinarily deep, not just about who is elected, but about the system itself.
The flip side of that, so that we can go into audience Q&A on a sort of less gloomy note about democracy. So the flip side is you are seeing really long lines, especially Georgia and Texas today, people coming out to participate. Is it sort of a meta-institutional? Is it beyond the institutions that if people come out and participate and really celebrate their democracy, does it matter less how, say, the president reacts?
Well, one thing can I just say, I don't think it's a great thing that we're seeing people waiting for 8 hours to vote, because that's unconscionable that it would take 8 hours to vote in this day and time. So, I mean, I'm glad we're seeing it in the sense that the commitment of people, but I just want to kind of put a pin in that, which is we should be demanding ways for people to vote, because there's a lot of people who can't take off 8 hours of work to go vote. So that's just in and of itself, I don't want us to become accustomed to that and think that's actually the way the system should work. I mean, I guess, sorry to be a downer, but no. That's ridiculous.
Fair. That is fair. We'll I guess we'll get into audience Q&A now. It's clearly a tough election. And we have one for you, Rick, on the Supreme Court. What do you believe is the best way to reform the Supreme Court, specifically in terms of the number of justices and how they're selected? Court packing?
Well, court packing is a negative way of talking about it. We call it that because when Franklin D. Roosevelt wanted to increase the number of justices in the court, it was something he had not run on. So I think he was right to try to fix the court, because the court was knocking down everything the New Deal came up with. And after Roosevelt did surface the idea of enlarging the court started to back off and stopped vetoing everything that the Congress was passing.
So
but I do think, as I say, I think this idea, it's a radical idea that hasn't caught on. The idea, people are talking about expanding the court. I'd be in favor of that over the status quo, but much better really would be to have this staggered every 2 years. There's a new justice appointed and a new justice who retires to a lifetime job or a lifetime salary. So that there would be some rough approximation of the will of the people and the composition of the court. Because right now, what we're facing now is a court that is simply not part of representative government. And the court is an institution that's really at the basis of the stability of the country. We are living in a time when we can start imagining Germany in 1932, where we have a president who is openly calling for flouting, for essentially canceling the outcome of an election through violence. We've never had to face this kind of a crisis before. I'm optimistic that we'll get through it and maybe come out the other side with a better system. But we're in a kind of danger that we've never been in before, not since the Civil War.
So open question, follow-up for that. Is it a good political tool for someone, say like Joe Biden, to hold, sort of have it in his quiver? I don't like expanding the court, but I just might have to, depending on what Republicans do in this last 3 weeks before the election. Is that what we've come down to, really?
I really don't know. I don't. It would be very much against Biden's kind of makeup and his personality to do anything big like that, to try to expand the court, the size of the court, something like that. But I think it is time for a conversation about the court and its role in American life, and about thinking about the court the way we've thought about the presidency and the way we've thought about Congress, not as an immutable, but rather as improvable. So I have a mixture of dread and hope for what's coming.
I don't think it's up to Biden to now say what he's going to do about that.
No.
I think he knows that there's a lot of conversation, and let the conversation proceed. I think that's important to have the politics of this kind of out in the open.
Temperamentally, it would be very much against Biden's temperament to take a step like expanding the court.
And somebody who's served in the Senate Judiciary for so long. So that kind of takes us to the next audience question. I'll leave it up to whoever wants to answer it. This questioner says they may be naive, and I don't think they are, but let's see what you think. But are there any issues that could actually bring bipartisan support right now? Is there any point of agreement? I mean, apparently not on coronavirus relief, which would seem to be the easy one. Is there, though, something?
I mean, I think the thing that is important, obviously, is the distinction between the leadership of the Republicans in the Congress versus Republicans across the country. Because, and this is where I just feel there's such a disservice to where the majority of people are. Most people don't see access to health care and protection for pre-existing conditions is not a partisan issue. That's an issue that affects millions of families, and people are concerned about it. Addressing the economic effects of this pandemic is not a partisan issue. That's hitting people all over the country. So I think I'm enormously optimistic that there are issues, even issues that we think of as traditionally women's issues like childcare. This has exposed the fact that we have no plan in this country for dealing with supporting families going back to work. These are issues that I hope a next administration, just as examples of ones where there is enormous bipartisan support in the country. The will of the people is really there. We just have to have leaders that are willing to lead. And I think to some of the questioners and some of the messages I'm seeing in the chat, for folks to actually bring people together around issues of enormous commonality. And that's the only way we're going to get through this pandemic.
Yeah, I was going to say, you answered that another question that we had on the chat, pretty much, that whether people are less polarized than Congress and the media, well, or the press lends them to believe. Do you think we're stuck in a polarization that is in some way artificial?
Well, of course, what makes news is tension, and so as a former newsman, I recognize you're going to go not so much to the compromises that are possible, but to the tension between the parties and the leaders. That said, I think it's also important, and I believe there's been a lot of conversation and reporting about what can be done to fix things. And I think that's important for journalists to not just be outraged, but to kind of spend time and energy looking at solutions.
So, in answering another audience question, in those solutions, do we need to first agree on a basic set of facts, or do we have to sort of lower the bar on what facts are and say, well, okay, facts are solid liquid gas and that's all we can agree on, or how do we start that process?
I have some alternative facts for that.
Go ahead.
Oh, just as I guess we've noted once or twice before in this conversation, the news universe, the media environment is very unfriendly to any kind of reaching across any aisles, and people are living in separate political universes. They simply don't know. Well, of course, I'm in one of those. I'm in the liberal of one of those universes. So I think I have a pretty accurate view of what's going on in the world. But if I were a Fox News viewer, I'd be living in a complete fantasy land. Now, so even my description of what the media landscape is like kind of suggests what a hole we're in when it comes to doing anything unified as a nation.
So there's the rosy question at the end. So where do we keep our hope? Where do we keep our hope in democracy? And the way this question was phrased is, how can you remain hopeful that we can remain intact when all safeguards have been eroded?
I think activity, action, movement, getting people out to vote. You don't have to ask them who they're going to vote for. Just get them out to vote. And by doing that, you will perform your duty as an American to make calls, to volunteer to drive people. I think that is the most important thing people can do. There's a lot of doom and gloom in the punditry, and you're not going to change that. But you can change if you walk your neighbor to the polling place.
I couldn't agree more. I know all of you all write and are in the media, but I just turn off the television at this point. It's really not healthy for you. And exactly, just take, whether it's taking your neighbor, whether it's signing up with an organization and doing texting or phoning to folks about voting. They're just, I think that, and that's what we've seen with women, is they're just ready to do whatever it is. And I think too that it is easy to get discouraged, but I think what would really be discouraging is if we saw these attacks on our democracy, on our fellow citizens, on families at the border, and there was no reaction in this country. I think what's really, to me, inspiring and has been about this past several years is the fact that folks just haven't given up and are continuing to stand up for what I think are really bedrock values in this country. And the other piece of this is, I think, taking joy in the success of some of the new leaders that are coming into office and that are willing to challenge the status quo. 2018, that wasn't that long ago. Record number of women of color elected to Congress, and they didn't stand in the background, waiting their turn. And I just, that's when democracy works best. I was speaking the other day, I'm just going to name drop real quick, speaking to Speaker Pelosi the other day about when she came to Congress, less than 5% of Congress was female. This year, almost 40% of the Democratic delegation are women. And so I just think that change is happening, and you can dwell on, and it's important to pay attention to the really tough stuff that's happening. But it's also easy to get energized by how people are not just sitting back.
So one of our viewers pointed out the elephant in the room. They have a point. We were supposed to have a presidential debate. I believe it was tonight, which So I'm glad that all the people watching get to watch us have a conversation with as few interruptions as possible. it certainly makes for better viewing, I hope. But the question here is, going back to Jack Brooks, what would he think of this, of avoiding a debate, avoiding the at the height of an election, and that's supposed to be in the best interest of the public, and suddenly it doesn't happen that's a multitude of reasons that we don't have time to list right now.
He loved the rough and tumble of politics. He would go after people wanted to challenge him on any of the issues he voted on. He would revel in it because to him that was the highest form of citizenship, and being able to take a position, to defend your position, to believe that you were in the right. And so I think what he would do is just be as energized as he ever was right now.
So, Cecile, connecting that to what you just said, what happened in the last, I don't know, half century, to put a number on it, that a lot of people who were disenfranchised, who were at some point told and at some point believed that they just couldn't make it, what happened that now they'll fight for a position? Because it's not easy to get to being a politician if you're supposed to quotation marks be disenfranchised, but people are doing it anyway. What happened?
The big mistake this country made was giving women the right to vote. And I have heard that from more than one man on the campaign trail. I mean, this is actually kind of interesting. So, of course, this is the centennial of the beginning of women's suffrage in this country. This November, well, it was actually in August. And, of course, it was an uneven suffrage because Black women of color really didn't get full enfranchisement until the Voting Rights Act. But I do think that it is what's changing is that people are now saying, why not me? And as Kamala Harris says, you better not, it's okay to be first, but you sure better not be the last. And I do think this is what women in particular are seeing, people of color are seeing, as folks saying, okay, they did it, I can do it too. Younger people who aren't waiting until they were like my mother's age to run for office. It used to be, in those days, there was one way to run for office if you were a woman. You had to have a certain hairstyle. You had to do all this. And now you look at just the women that ran for president. So different backgrounds. So I just feel like that is, I guess, my hope at the end of the day is that small d democracy starts working because people start stepping up and people support each other. And we begin to have a government that looks more like us. And then at least we can all make our own mistakes, not just be the victims or, sort of have to deal with whatever's been decided by a very small group of people who don't represent the majority of this country.
So we have time for one more question. Congresswoman Jackson Lee, of course, was joining from an outdoor event. So her connection apparently the internet was unable to bring her back to us, sadly, but we did get to have her around for a minute. But here's an audience question that we'll end on, and we can start with you, Tim. Who else? And I think everybody should answer this one. Who else besides Congresswoman Jackson Lee is continuing the legacy of Jack Brooks's work today?
I think tens of thousands of young people are now getting involved, and who they hadn't thought about it very much in earlier elections, either because they were too young or because they just weren't interested in politics. I have a granddaughter here in North Carolina who is going to be 18 3 days before the election. She was able to already vote in the primary because she could at 17. But I think that they are really mobilizing in ways that maybe not since our generation, or at least Rick and my generation in the 60s, and where they are looking at things and saying, yes, they can make change and it's the world they're going to live in. I mean, the things that they're interested in, climate change for one, we haven't even talked about yet. And that's something that they know that's going to impact them for the rest of their lives.
I totally second every word Tim just said.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to top, actually. It is inspiring. And I think, I know I was perhaps too critical about lines of people voting. I just think it's outrageous that it is so hard. But the fact that today, 21 days out of this election, 11 million people have already voted, that's just a sign that we have a healthy democracy. And I think Jack Brooks would love that.
Amen.
Excellent. I think that is actually a great place to end this. We had Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee with us for a minute there. We had Tim McNulty and Cecile Richards and Hendrik Hertzberg, and this for the 92nd Street Y and the Jack Brooks Foundation. I am Rafael Bernal, and this conversation has been great. Thank you all for chatting.
Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Nice.
Possible in Texas, and that it is becoming a